This is Dr. Lisa Firestone, and I'd like to welcome you to this Brain Shark on conquering your critical inner voice. This is me, Dr. Lisa Firestone, and this Brain Shark is brought to you by the Glendon Association and PsychAlive. I'd like to start by defining the critical inner voice. The critical inner voice refers to a well-integrated pattern of destructive thoughts toward ourselves and toward others. The quotes voices that make up this internalized dialogue are at the root of much of our maladaptive behavior. This internal enemy fosters inwardness, distrust, self-criticism, self-denial, addictions, and a retreat from goal-directed activities. The critical inner voice affects every aspect of our lives, our self-esteem and confidence, our personal and intimate relationships, and our performance and accomplishments at school and at work. I think this cartoon captures the source of the critical inner voice. We have our psychologist looking very much like Freud there and our cat on the couch. And the cat is saying, "To this day I can hear my mother's voice, harsh, accusing, 'Lost your mittens, you naughty kittens, then you shall have no pie.'" I think this cartoon by FEIFFER also really captures the nature of what we're talking about in terms of the critical inner voice. It starts off, "I am a critic. I am not a book, art, theater, film, music, or dance critic. I am a Bernard critic, a resident critic living inside the head of a Bernard. He wakes up and I tell him, 'You're late.' At the office I tell him, 'You're behind.' At dinner parties I tell him, 'You're boring.' When he falls in love I tell him, 'You're not good enough.' On occasion, he can't take any more reviews and he orders me out of his head. So I rip off my mask and I say, 'Is that any way to talk to your mother?'" So let's talk about some common critical inner voices that people experience. First, let's talk about critical inner voices people have about themselves. "You're stupid." "You're unattractive." "You're not like other people." We found this is actually the most common negative thought that people have, that they're not like other people, not in some positive, unique way, but in some negative way. It turns out nobody feels like they're part of the in-group. "You're a failure." Common voices people have about their careers or their work lives. "Who do you think you are? You'll never be successful." "You're under too much pressure. You can't take it." "You'll never get everything done. You're so lazy." "No one appreciates you." Again, some of these negative thoughts are about other people. Now, what about the most common negative thoughts people have about their relationships? "He doesn't really care about you." "She's too good for you." "You're better off on your own." "Don't be too vulnerable or you'll just wind up getting hurt." These are common critical inner voices that most people can identify with. For some people, they experience the critical inner voice as though it was a panel discussion in their head, and I think this cartoon captures that idea. We have our man in the middle here, and this voice, "Odd haircut, unfortunate suit, terrible tie, get off my nose." So where do critical inner voices come from? They usually come from our early life experience. They can come from parents or primary caretakers, or they can come from interactions with teachers and with peers that are internalized and taken in as ways we think about ourselves. So how can you begin to identify your critical inner voice in action? You can recognize events that trigger your critical inner voice, interactions with others, frustrations at work, or getting on a scale, for instance. You can recognize the specific outside criticisms that support your critical inner voice. So when you have a very big reaction to negative feedback from somebody else, and it might even seem like a strong overreaction, it's often because it's the way we think about ourselves. So it's not the truth that hurts, but what we think about ourselves that we really get reactive to. And we can become aware of times when we may be projecting our self-attacks onto others. So when we see others as very critical of us, whether it's parents or relationship partners or peers, we can think about the fact that this might be a way we're thinking about ourselves. We can also notice when our mood changes. When our mood goes from looking at the glass as half full to half empty, without anything really changing in our lives, we have to ask ourselves, what were we telling ourselves at those moments? So how can we challenge our critical inner voice? We're going to share with you some exercises that come from our book, Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice. And the first exercise is visualizing the real you. So identifying what are your real qualities, your physical abilities, your positive qualities, your interests and activities, the things that light you up and really matter to you. And what are your long-term goals? How would you like your life to be? And what are your short-term goals? And last, where do you stand in relation to your goals? This first exercise is really aimed at helping you get a hold of your real self in contrast to that of your critical inner voice. The second exercise we'd like to share with you also comes from our book, Conquer Your Critical Inner Voice. And it has you first identify what you might think of as I statements, things like, I don't think I'm an attractive person. And instead, put it in the second person as though another person were imparting this information to you as a you statement. You're not attractive. This helps you start to separate from this internal enemy. This next exercise is an ongoing journaling exercise where you divide the page in half. And on one side of the page, you, at the end of the day, write down all the critical inner voices that you're aware of. And you write them as you statements. For example, you're so stupid. But then you come back to it later, and on the other side of the page, you try to generate a more realistic, compassionate view of yourself. Not a thought building yourself up or saying you're so great. So it wouldn't be I'm the smartest person in the world, because that's probably not true either. But a realistic, compassionate statement, something like, sometimes I struggle with work, but I catch on quickly and I usually do a good job. This is also a journaling exercise you can do on our website, PsychAlive, in the journal section. The next exercise is a plan for action. So how are you going to take actions that really represent the real you instead of representing your critical inner voice? So you have to first of all identify what are actions that you're engaged in your day-to-day life that are dictated by your critical inner voice. For instance, here are some examples. Have another piece of cake. This is our critical inner voice seducing us into any kind of addictive behavior. You should just be on your own. And that leads us to isolate ourselves. Or you can't trust anyone, so don't get too close, so we may pull back in our relationship. And then you think about actions to take that would really reflect what you really want in your life, your real goals. So examples of that might be, I want to eat healthy and take care of myself, so I'm not going to have that extra piece of cake. Or, I don't want to be isolated, so I'm going to seek out my friends. Or, I want to stay vulnerable and close in my relationship, so I'm going to continue to act in a way that is going to generate closeness between me and my relationship partner. Here I just want to mention quickly that my father, Dr. Robert Firestone, has developed voice therapy, which we consider a cognitive affective behavioral approach because we're interested in these thought process. We're also interested in the emotion behind these thoughts and in really changing behaviors that are self-destructive. And this is one way of overcoming the critical inner voice is through voice therapy. I like to use this visual because I think it gives us a clear idea about what we're talking about in terms of this critical inner voice. There's your real self, as represented here by Max from The Wild Things, and your anti-self, represented by the monsters from The Wild Things. And when you act on your critical inner voice, you're growing the monster. Your critical inner voice takes more and more control over your behavior and runs your life. What we would like you to do is instead grow your real self. Take actions that represent the real you and make that part of yourself stronger and also weaken the hold that the critical inner voice has over you, like you see with Max here growing. For instance, when Max said goodbye to the Wild Things and says, I'm going to go, and the monsters say, don't go, we'll eat you up, we love you so. And he says he's going to go anyways. You have to take actions that go against your critical inner voice. We want to share with you some things to think of when breaking with your critical inner voice. The first is that fear accompanies change. There's no change for the positive in your life where you don't feel some fear. So you get a new job, or you start a new relationship, or you go off to college. These are all positive changes in your life, but you're going to feel anxious. When you start to feel anxious by going against your critical inner voice, recognize that anxiety is coming from the fact that you're growing, that you're changing. It doesn't mean that there's something bad happening. Also, realize that your psychological pain is valid, that these negative thoughts and the pain you feel from them came from somewhere, not in order to establish blame, but to help you get some compassion for yourself. It's also important to develop a more realistic view of your parents. We tend to want to idealize our parents or in some cases to demonize them and think they're the root of all evil. But instead, it's important to have a balanced view of our parents as real people with both positive and negative traits. The positive traits we naturally want to be part of our personality, but the negative traits often act as an overlay on our personality, and these are what we need to separate from. We also want to seek our own personal meaning in life. What really matters to us? We don't want to relive somebody else's prescription for us. We want to seek things that give our life meaning. All of the research in psychology shows that when we have more personal meaning in our life, we have a much better life. And that involves differentiation. It involves unlearning old behaviors that were maybe adaptive in the past, but that are no longer adaptive in our current lives, and learning new behaviors that will really help us reach our goals, and again, seek our own personal meaning in life. And to learn more about this process of differentiation, see our brain shark on Becoming the Real You. So here are some guidelines for further developing a meaningful life. First of all, be generous in all your relationships. Being generous makes us feel good about ourselves, and this means giving in all different kinds of ways. It's not about a financial issue, it's about giving of yourself. And when we do this, it develops our real self-esteem. It makes us feel good about ourselves. It's also important to become aware of existential realities, to realize that even while our life may be limited, we can give each of our days meaning. We can make choices that make our story the most interesting story possible. And we can develop a spiritual perspective and appreciate the mystery of existence. We can develop our own meaning in life in a way that makes our lives really valuable to us. So here's some more resources. Our two websites, our website for the general public, PsychAlive.org, where you can learn more about the critical inner voice, and our website for professionals, Glendon.org, where you can learn more about voice therapy. And here are resources in terms of the books we have written that address this subject of the critical inner voice. And you can click on any of these book covers to find out more about each of these books. Our most recent book is The Self Under Siege. You can see a list of our upcoming webinars or online live presentations on PsychAlive.org. We have both free webinars and ones for CEs for professionals. So to contact me, you can go to the Glendon Association, and there's our phone number. And then again, here are our two websites. Thank you for joining me for this Brain Shark presentation.